You can be strong, technical, even crazy jacked, but if your conditioning isn't on point, none of that stuff matters. Don't be that guy with all the instructionals and giant delts that still gasses out after one hard scramble. In this podcast, I'm breaking down the conditioning methods that have worked best for myself and all of the athletes that I coach, why most workout plans actually get grappling conditioning all wrong, and the steps that you can take to build a lasting gas tank without having to spend hours on the treadmill. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. I'm fired up and excited to be hanging out with you today. We are going to be talking all about conditioning. We got a lot to go over, and when it comes to conditioning, I think conditioning is something that I don't think gets talked about enough with grapplers. And I think some grappling athletes go really, really hard in the paint on lifting and understanding the principles of hypertrophy and building strength and all that stuff. And then they just roll hard at jujitsu as their main form of conditioning. And not that you can't be successful with that, like, lifting heavy and rolling hard is what we're all about. However, if you want to develop true elite grappling athleticism, you also need to understand not just how to get strong, not just how to build muscle, but how to build a gas tank that never quits. And what we're going to go over today is going to be your blueprint in helping you understand the different energy systems your body uses, the different types of workouts you can do throughout different points of your jiu-jitsu career or different points throughout training camp if you're a competitor. And you guys also submitted a ton of questions for this podcast. And I'm going to make sure that we break all of those down for you today. So, the first thing that we're going to start with is just understanding energy systems. Your body uses different energy systems to fuel and provide energy for different types of physical activity. The most extreme examples of this would be the energy systems that you use to lift a 1 rep max deadlift is going to be very different than the energy systems that you use when you're running a marathon. And that's not to say that any of these energy systems are kind of all or nothing. It's not like you have buttons where it's like, I'm doing a deadlift, I've hit the button for that energy system. And then if I go run, I hit the button for that energy system. It's kind of more like those dials on a producer board. If you guys have ever seen those old school videos of Dr. Dre in the studio with Tupac or Eminem, there are buttons, but there's also these, I don't know if they call them levelers or what they call them, but they're these like sliders that you can slide up and slide down. So that way you can have a very precise setting for each of those different parts of the mix or the how whatever they're producing, the song, the beat, whatever. And your body acts very similarly, where it's not all or nothing in any one of these different types of energy systems. All of these energy systems are kind of all working at the same time. However, depending on what type of physical activity you're going to be doing, that may influence which of those energy systems is going to be more emphasized over the other. And there are three main energy systems that we need to talk about. There are broken up into two categories. So we have anaerobic, which means essentially without oxygen, and then we have aerobic, which essentially means with oxygen. Just looking at those two categories, when we think of aerobic types of physical activity, that's going to be long duration runs, walking, jogging, even doing jujitsu. There's a lot of aerobic work that happens when you're doing a 60 to 90-minute jujitsu class. When we look at anaerobic types of physical activity, that's your lifting weights, your sprints. If you're doing like really, really short rounds, like 30-second rounds, 15-second rounds, trying to scramble to different positions on the mat, that's going to be very anaerobic. Now, within those two categories are three main energy systems. The first one is going to be your anaerobic alactic energy system, or your ATP phosphocreatine energy system. This energy system is used primarily with forms of physical activity that are about 0 to 10 seconds in duration, and it uses a lot of explosive energy, and it fuels that energy production by pulling from ATP and phosphocreatine stored within your muscles. So anaerobic, alactic, we can also call this the ATP PC or the ATP phosphocreatine energy system. It's the fastest type of energy production that your body has. However, it also lasts the shortest, only up to about 10 seconds or so, and it also takes the longest to recharge. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you could look at this, but one thing I like to think of is like if you're playing Mario Kart and you're going and you get that star. I think it's a star. You get some item where like you turn in, it plays the crazy music and you just start zipping past everybody. That's awesome. You get a ton of energy boosted on you in a very, very short period of time. However, those stars don't come very frequently. They're very few and far between. Another way you can think of this is like on the Batmobile. Basically, every iteration of the Batmobile has some giant jet engine on the back, and then when Batman needs to gas it, needs to close the gap on somebody, he hits that jet engine and blasts all the flames out the back, and he starts like going crazy, crazy, crazy fast. But it doesn't last very long. That using that jet engine on the Batmobile is not very sustainable past a very short period of time, and your body works very similarly where if you're going to run a blast double on somebody, if you're going to pull a 1 rep max deadlift, if you're going to even if you're going to do like a hill sprint that's 10 seconds or so, you're using that anaerobic alactic energy system. And what's great is that you can produce a ton of energy very, very, very fast. However, it doesn't last very long and it takes a while to recover from. If you were to think about, okay, if we look at two different forms of running, we have sprinting and we have running a marathon. The guys that are running marathons are producing energy at a very consistent, sustainable pace for a long period of time. If you were to run a sprint, you sprint, but then you need a lot of rest afterwards because you just spent all of those ATP phosphocreatine stores that were essentially providing energy for you. That's the first energy system. Anaerobic, alactic. Another phrase that we could use to label this would be the ATP PC energy system. The next energy system is going to be anaerobic lactic. We could also call this fast glycolysis or the fast glycolysis energy system. Now, this is where, you go past that 10-second mark and you start working in the time domain of very, very intense physical activity that's about 10 to 90 seconds in length. That's when we start shifting to the anaerobic lactic or fast glycolysis energy system. This is where you're doing high intensity forms of physical activity and your body is breaking down glucose or going through glycolysis to produce ATP, to produce enough energy to sustain that physical activity. You get energy very, very fast, and it's also going to be done without the use of oxygen or not in the presence of oxygen, so to speak. It's kind of like an oversimplified way of describing it. However, this does come at a cost because you're within that 10 to 90 second range, and a byproduct of going through glycolysis is the production of lactate. And as you start to produce more and more lactate, the chemical reactions that are going on inside the muscle to break down glucose to generate or break down glycogen. Glucose gets converted into glycogen, and you break down glycogen within your muscle to produce the energy. And that process produces lactate. And if you're not able to buffer lactate effectively, you start to feel that crazy burn within your muscles. So if you do a set, if you're scrambling, whether it's in a match or whether you're doing like short scramble rounds, if you're scrambling for 30 to 60 seconds on the mat and you start to feel that crazy burn, you start to feel like maybe even a little bit of lightheadedness, you start getting really, really out of breath, you are using a lot of that anaerobic lactic or fast glycolysis energy system. And the thing is that it's great because it produces a lot of energy very, very quickly. It does take a little while to recover from, not as long as the ATP PC energy system. However, you are accumulating a lot of those metabolites and a lot of metabolic waste when you're relying very heavily on that anaerobic lactic energy system. Now, the third and final energy system of this big three that we can talk about is the aerobic or oxidative energy system. This is something where you're going to use this energy system primarily when the overall intensity of the physical activity is a lot lower and it's lasting longer than 2 minutes up to several hours. So you think about running a marathon, that is a very aerobic, oxidative type of conditioning event. Your aerobic and oxidative energy system is also oftentimes running in the background to help replenish other energy systems like your ATP PC energy system. It's also running in the background while you're doing a full jiu-jitsu class. So even though you might be, have an instance where on the mat you're in the middle of a 6-minute round and you need to run a blast double on somebody, when you run that blast double, you're emphasizing the ATP PC energy system. When you land on the ground, so you're kind of holding position a little bit, you're gaining your breath back, you're maintaining composure, your body is shifting a little bit more back towards that aerobic or oxidative energy system. If you're able to hold that position for a couple minutes, you're able to bring your respiratory rate back down just a little bit. It doesn't feel as intense, but you're still working, kind of emphasizing a little bit more of that aerobic oxidative energy system. Now, with this energy system, you are breaking down glycogen and glucose within your body. That's going to be glucose oxidation for this energy system. And you could also go through beta oxidation or fat oxidation to convert fat into energy so that way it could fuel this physical activity. So those three energy systems are what I typically like to call the big three. Your anaerobic alactic, which is your ATP PC, your anaerobic lactic, which is also known as fast glycolysis, and your aerobic, also known as oxidative. The words get really, really trippy, so from here on out, for the rest of this podcast, I'm going to stick with the terms ATP, PC, glycolysis or fast glycolysis, and oxidative. And we may go back to the other terms in there as well, but I'm going to try the best I can to keep it as congruent as possible, so that way we're not getting mixed up with the terms here, because even I get mixed up with the terms talking about this after a while. So all that being said, all three of these energy systems are pretty much always at work, but what changes is the emphasis your body places on using any of these three energy systems at any one given period of time. And typically, intensity and the type of physical activity will dictate what energy systems are being utilized. So, like I said earlier, if you're running a blast double on somebody, there's a very, very strong chance that your body is going to be emphasizing that ATP PC energy system. If you're doing a scramble, you're trying to pass someone's guard, they defend, so you hit a counter guard pass, they defend, then you try to do like some crazy wedging back take and scramble to their back, and that takes 30, 40, 45 seconds to finish that scramble, you're going to be using a lot of that fast glycolysis energy system. If you're going for a 10-minute round, or you're doing like a no time limit match or something like that, where there are going to be little pockets where you have some flurries of activity, but other than that, it's a much lower intensity that's sustained over a much longer period of time. That's going to be heavily emphasizing the oxidative energy system. Now, the thing is it's not like I said, it's not necessarily a button where you push the button, you're like, okay, I'm using ATP PC, and then when it goes past exactly at 10 seconds, then it exactly shifts over and I push the fast glycolysis button. It doesn't necessarily work like that. So we have the big three. However, the big three do kind of get broken down into this spectrum where we kind of have 5 categories of energy systems. And so with ATP PC, it's pretty safe to say that you're using that energy system, or that energy system is being emphasized the most in bouts of physical activity that are about 90 to 100% intensity or effort, and usually within the 0 to 6 second time domain. Again, these aren't exact, these are generalizations and estimates, but if you do a sprint, if you sprint with a sled for 5 seconds, it's pretty safe to say that you are really emphasizing the ATP PC energy system. If you are doing a sprint that lasts 20 seconds, it's pretty safe to say that you're no longer using the ATP PC energy system. So that's the first one, ATP PC. Then as the intensity stays high, but the time duration starts to increase a little bit, we start to move into this blend of ATP PC and fast glycolysis. And that's usually emphasized at physical activity taking place between 75 to 90% intensity, and usually within a time duration of 6 to 30 seconds. Once we start to get past that 30-second mark, it's pretty safe to say that we're really just emphasizing only, I shouldn't say emphasizing only, but what's being emphasized the most, I think is a better way to phrase it, is fast glycolysis. So fast glycolysis conditioning or using the fast glycolysis energy system really comes at physical activity taking place between 30 to 75% intensity, lasting anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Once we start to go beyond that 2 minute mark, kind of within that 2 to 3 minute time frame, that's where we start crossing over and really blending fast glycolysis and oxidative conditioning. Usually that's at physical activity within 30 to 75% and within that 2 to 3 minute window. A great example of this, and this type of conditioning is really, really tough, is if you've ever done the 500-meter rowing test on a Concept 2 rower. Like getting 2 minutes on the rower for 500 meters isn't that. I mean, for me, it's not that difficult. I think it helps that I'm in pretty good shape and I am decently strong, but maybe someone who's not as strong and can't pull on the handle as hard on the rower machine, maybe 2 minutes is a little bit more of a challenge. But it's at 2 minutes. And so when I've done this before where I do 500-meter repeats, I can get within like a minute 45 to 2 minutes fairly easily for the first few sets. But then after a while, it gets really, really tough. And then my, 500-meter splits go from like 2 minutes to 2:05 to 2:10. And we're within that 2 to 3 minute time frame, which absolutely sucks. And yeah, so working on fast glycolysis and oxidative conditioning is really, really brutal. But once it goes beyond that 3 minute time domain, it's pretty safe to say that we're strongly emphasizing the oxidative energy system. And this is usually at about 20 to 30% intensity, lasting longer than 3 minutes. So, some other great examples would be hey, if you're going to run a 40-yard dash, that's really going to be emphasizing the ATP PC energy system. If you are running a 400-meter sprint, that's going to be emphasizing a lot of fast glycolysis. If you're going to run a mile, it's going to also be emphasizing a lot of the oxidative energy system. And again, that's not to say that you're only using one of these energy systems at a time. You're using all of them at the same time. However, depending on what kind of physical activity you're doing, depending on how intense it is, one of those energy systems is going to be emphasized over the others. And so that kind of covers the main energy systems. If you have a good handle and understanding on the different energy systems your body uses, I'm telling you, you can already take huge leaps in your conditioning, because I think a big problem that grapplers have is that they don't necessarily understand everything that's going on with their conditioning. And so when they do their conditioning work off the mat, they're oftentimes taking shots in the dark, and that can be really, really bad. It's almost like trying to do jujitsu blindfolded. Like if you're really, really good at jujitsu, wearing a blindfold is difficult, but it's not that difficult, because as long as you can connect to someone's arm and you're like, okay, if I know where their arm is at, I can kind of have a good idea on where the rest of their body is, depending on how I'm manipulating their arm. Using your eyes in jujitsu and taking in that information is very, very helpful. But the better you are at jujitsu, I would say the less you have to rely so strongly on your eyes. However, if you take someone who's a white belt and has only done like 3 jujitsu classes and then put a blindfold on them, they are just taking shots in the dark. They have an arm, they're like, I don't know what to do with this, and I don't even know where the rest of their body is, even though I have their arm. So I think grapplers make a similar mistake with conditioning, where they know enough to recognize that they should work on conditioning, but they don't understand the different energy systems that are being used. They don't understand the ways the body will emphasize different energy systems depending on the types of physical activity, and they end up taking shots in the dark with the type of conditioning work that they do off the mat. It's important to understand that jiu-jitsu is a mixed energy domain sport. What that means is that your body is using all 3 of those different energy systems, ATP, PC, fast glycolysis, and oxidative. It's using all 3 of those all the time. And there are going to be different points throughout your training on the mat and practice, different points within competition where you're kind of running and back and forth and having to toggle up and down the use of those 3 different energy systems. It's not like running a marathon where, yes, having some ATP PC conditioning can be beneficial, having some fast glycolysis conditioning can be beneficial, but really it's an oxidative sport. It's not like running a marathon. And it's also not like powerlifting, where, hey, doing some oxidative conditioning is good for powerlifters. However, it's not the main event. You need to be really, really good at producing tons of force insanely fast using that ATP PC energy system. Jiu-jitsu exists in the middle. When you are competing at a jiu-jitsu tournament, and I got two guys right now that are prepping for Master Worlds, so they're going to have multiple 5-minute matches, and within those 5-minute matches, we got to make sure that their fast glycolysis conditioning is on point, that their ATP PC conditioning is on point. We also got to make sure that their oxidative conditioning is on point as well, and not just for the 5-minute match, but oxidative conditioning has a lot to do with your recovery and your ability to recover from higher intensity bouts of physical activity. So jiu-jitsu really is a sport that requires you to develop all three of those, and if you only emphasize one over the others, you're not going to be able to feel and perform your best. You're not going to be able to really develop an elite grappling gas tank that stops you from gassing out. So all that being said, let's get into some practical steps that you can take to improve your conditioning. The first step that I have every athlete start with, and it's something that I wish I started doing for myself way earlier, is fix your breathing. Fixing your breathing is the number one thing you can do to see the fastest results and improvements in your conditioning. If you guys have ever seen Karate Kid 3, Terry Silver, he's putting Daniel on game and he's telling him the 3 rules of the Quicksilver fighting system. I think it's if a man can't see, he can't fight. If a man can't stand, he can't fight. And if a man can't breathe, he can't fight. So, all that being said, jiu-jitsu is, a great example of this, because if you stop someone from breathing or getting oxygen into their brain, they ain't fighting no more and they're going to sleep. However, we also have to take that into account for ourselves. If we, as grapplers, are unable to breathe efficiently, unable to have control over our breathing, unable to regulate our breathing to a point where we're really efficient at taking in oxygen, letting out CO2, and not letting the concentrations of either one of those two things get too out of whack. If we can't do that, we're not going to be able to fight very well. We're not going to be able to roll very well. So the first thing that I start every athlete off with when I begin working with them when it comes to conditioning is their breath work. Now, your breath control really is going to influence the control you have over emphasizing all the different energy systems. When you learn to control your breath in both relaxed states or parasympathetic states, rest, digest, chilling out, and you're able to control your breath in stressed states or sympathetic states, fight, flight, freeze. I heard Rob Wilson. Rob Wilson has a lot of great information out there on breathwork. He was saying that the sympathetic nervous system has 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fornicate, which I had never heard that fourth one associated with the sympathetic nervous system. I thought that was kind of funny. I guess that just shows where my level of sense of humor is at. But all that being said, the better you can control your breath in both relaxed states and stress states, the better you're going to be able to perform as an athlete. Now, you want to be able to get to the point where you can manage your breath well to further help influence your recovery, to further help influence what energy systems you're emphasizing while you're rolling on the mat and while you're lifting in the gym. And the best place to begin to learn how to control your breath is just to focus on nasal breathing. This is something that I really wish that I learned in high school when I was wrestling. I don't think I'm bragging by saying that I had a pretty good gas tank when I was wrestling in high school. I wasn't a great wrestler, but I can say I had a good gas tank. I would lose a lot of matches, but at least I wasn't gassing out. And so one of the things that contributed to that was I really did work on my conditioning a lot. I did a ton of CrossFit. I was running a lot, doing a lot of sprints, working on my repeat sprint ability. And I did see some big improvements in my conditioning, but man, let me tell you something. I wish I learned about nasal breathing when I was in high school. I didn't learn about nasal breathing until I'd already competed in jiu-jitsu for several years. And this was really like a big level up for me And as soon as I started nasal breathing and working on my own nasal breathing, I saw huge improvements in my conditioning. And I know there's people out there that say that, oh, nasal breathing doesn't do anything for you. There's no studies that actually prove that nasal breathing is effective. I don't know where they're getting that information or how they can even say that, because at least for me, in my own experience, focusing on nasal breathing has drastically improved my conditioning, and it's also been one of the best and most reliable methods that I've used with the athletes that I coach, both online and in person, to help them see huge improvements in their conditioning. Now, some of the main benefits that come from nasal breathing, breathing in and out of your nose, is that if you're able to make that your default form of breathing at rest, it's going to help you be in a more parasympathetic state, which means the more you're able to be in that restful state, you're going to improve your recovery, you're going to improve your digestion and nutrient absorption, and you're going to be better prepared the next time you go into a hard training session. I like to think of this idea of stimulus and recovery, whether that's stimulus from your training session on the mat or in the gym, and recovery being eating, sleeping. For me, a big part of my recovery is watching movies. When I think about those things, I like to think about peaks and valleys. You want your training stimulus to be the highest peak possible. Like you want to have a great training stimulus where it's the right amount of intensity, the right amount of volume, the right amount of difficulty. But then as soon as that training session's over, you should dive deep into the recovery valley as hard as possible. You don't want to have like this ramp up of a training stimulus that kind of lingers on for several hours after you've already left the gym, and then kind of dip into recovery a little bit, but then a few hours later you start getting amped up again. I like to think of it as like when you train, you're training. So you spike up that stimulus, but then as soon as training's done, you dive deep into recovery, kind of having those peaks and valleys. And nasal breathing and focusing on nasal breathing and making it your default form of breathing at rest is a great way to do that. Now, there's also great benefits to nasal breathing while you're doing physical activity, and some of those are going to be increased CO2 or carbon dioxide tolerance. The greater your ability to withstand higher concentrations of CO2, the better you're able to use aerobic energy systems before switching and emphasizing some of those anaerobic energy systems. This is something that I think is probably the biggest benefit, is improving your own CO2 tolerance. When you start to get that lightheaded, or maybe not lightheaded, but you start to get that feeling of getting out of breath, and your muscles are burning and things are going crazy, and you feel like you just need to take a big breath in. That's a sign that the CO2 to oxygen concentrations within your body are kind of out of whack. Maybe not out of whack, but at least just really emphasized on CO2. And if you're able to have a higher tolerance of higher concentrations of CO2, that means that you can push a harder pace for longer periods of time compared to your opponent. That means that you can hang in on the set, whether you're doing incline dumbbell bench press for 10 to 12 reps or whatever the case may be, and you might have a little bit more energy to, or a better ability to withstand those higher concentrations of CO2, so you can push a little bit harder for one extra rep or maybe two extra reps. And all of those little things, in the moment they may not seem like much, but over time they add up to a lot. So one of the main benefits of breathing in and out of your nose while you're rolling is helping develop your increased CO2 tolerance, which goes a long way. Now, the other thing that nasal breathing helps with is it helps prevent over breathing. There's a guy out there, I've talked about him before on different podcasts. His name's Patrick McEwen. He wrote this book called The Oxygen Advantage, and he was the person that really helped me kind of dive deep into learning more about nasal breathing. And one of the things that nasal breathing helps with is helping you fix the problem of over breathing. If you find that constantly throughout the day you have to take like a really big deep breath in or let out a big sigh, that is a sign that you are over breathing a little bit. And by over breathing, he talks about the way you're breathing and taking in oxygen and letting out CO2. You're either taking in a little bit too much oxygen based on the physical activity that you're doing, and or you're offloading and exhaling a little bit of too much CO2 depending on the physical activity that you're doing. So if you're just at rest and you're just on your computer, you don't need to be taking these super, super crazy deep breaths in and crazy deep breaths out. I mean, you shouldn't be. I mean, you're just hanging out working on the computer. But imagine if you held your breath for as long as you can. Towards the end of that, you start to feel that sensation to breathe again, and you take a big breath in, or you kind of like blow out, try to offload some of that CO2. That, if it's not matched well with the type of physical activity that you're doing, that could be a problem. And so focusing on nasal breathing just helps you have a little bit better control of how you're bringing in oxygen, how you're offloading CO2 by having a little bit better control of that respiratory process. It's going to help with your overall conditioning, help you emphasize a little bit more of those aerobic energy systems before you have to shift more into those anaerobic focused energy systems. Now, the other thing that I found nasal breathing to be helpful with is this strengthening the muscles and tissues of my respiratory system. When I first tried nasal breathing during my conditioning and during my rounds at jiu-jitsu, it felt like I was breathing through a pinhole. Like both nostrils were, it felt so small and so restricted. And it was really difficult. But over time, probably took like maybe a month of being really deliberate about nasal breathing, I started to feel like my airways were opening up a little bit more. I started to feel like my diaphragm was even a little bit stronger, where my diaphragm could expand a little bit more and take in a little bit more air without as much effort, which was pretty cool. I don't have like before and after data to show like, oh, this is how strong my lungs are, my diaphragm was before I started nasal breathing, and this is how strong they are now. It's not like I hit a diaphragm max effort PR or anything like that, but just anecdotally for myself, I have really noticed my airways open up in my nose and my nasal cavity, and feel like my diaphragm is a lot stronger since I started introducing nasal breathing. Now, we've talked about it a little bit before, but just to reiterate, nasal breathing in and out of your nose while you're working on some of your conditioning and while you're rolling hard on the mat can improve your aerobic efficiency and prolong the point at which you experience fatigue. So, one thing that happens is when you're rolling really, really hard and you hit that wall where you end up gassing out, or you red line and you gas out, that's something called your blood lactate threshold, which basically means like you have reached the point, the highest point that you could push, the highest work rate that your body could push for a prolonged period of time. But when it can't do it anymore, boom, you just kind of fall off and you crash and burn. It's almost like redlining your engine, or driving your car so hard, you're going really, really fast, and after a while just can't maintain, just can't hold on anymore, and it drops you back down. So nasal breathing can help prolong the point at which you hit that blood lactate threshold. And my theory behind this, and my thought behind this, is that if you're nasal breathing, you're focusing on breathing in and out of your nose as much as possible, you're emphasizing a lot of those aerobic energy systems, or the oxidative energy system. And that is an energy system that can be sustained for a much longer period of time, as opposed to if you emphasized ATP PC or fast glycolysis. And so by nasal breathing, you're focusing a little bit more on doing most of the work that you're doing, whatever the physical activity is. You're focusing on using the oxidative energy system, and you're not immediately just jumping right into emphasizing fast glycolysis, where if you use fast glycolysis and you emphasize that really, really hard, you are going to hit a breaking point. You are going to hit a point where you redline and you fall into oxidative, or emphasizing the oxidative energy system, and you just can't sustain using fast glycolysis anymore. And so, in my mind, the theory that I have, and really this is why I think it's one of the biggest benefits to being able to quickly improve your conditioning, is that you're just training your body to be much more efficient with using oxidative or the aerobic energy systems, instead of just jumping right into some of the faster fueling but shorter duration energy systems. Now, there are a few different things that you can do to improve your ability to nasal breathe. It is very difficult to do right from the jump. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, all right, Coach Jay, I hear you, I got to breathe in and out through my nose, I'm going to go run sprints with some mouth tape. I would not suggest that. There are a few steps that I take with the athletes that I coach, and these were very similar to the steps that I took to help improve my ability to nasal breathe and get more comfortable with breathing in and out of my nose. And the first method that I use with athletes is just something called parasympathetic beta oxidation, or PBO for short, walks. So PBO walks, or parasympathetic beta oxidation walks. Now, these walks are essentially where you go out for 30 to 45 minutes or so, and you're going to walk at a really, really chill pace and just focus on nasal breathing. That's it. You're not trying to do zone 2 cardio. You're not trying to do anything like that. You're literally just going out for a walk outside, 30 to 45 minutes, focus on nasal breathing. You want to be walking at a good pace. Like, you don't want to be like just super slowly shuffling your feet or anything like that. But you shouldn't be out of breath. You shouldn't be, I mean, unless it's super hot outside, maybe you're gonna sweat. I know I sweat like crazy. I don't even have to be walking. I just start sweating like crazy. But you're not trying to work up a sweat or anything like that. You're just going for a really chill walk for 30 to 45 minutes. And you're focusing on nasal breathing in and out of your nose the entire time. What's great about this is that it gives you a little bit of physical activity to work on and improve your nasal breathing at a really, really low intensity first before you start adding in higher intensity physical activity. And what's also great is that it's very because it's long duration, lower intensity, it's going to help train your body to rely a lot more on beta oxidation, or fat oxidation, as its primary fuel source when it comes to producing ATP for energy. Now, you can almost think of this as like, okay, if we wanted to teach someone how to squat well, we aren't going to load up their 1 rep max and say, all right, squat ass to grass, good luck. That would be a little ridiculous. We're going to start with lighter weights, or sub-maximal weights, where they can really get used to the movement pattern, where they can get used to the bar positioning on their back, or if they're doing a zercher squat, the bar positioning in their elbows. They get used to what it's like to brace under a little bit of load, but nothing too crazy. They kind of sit in the bottom a little bit, get comfortable with that ass to grass position, stand up, and we do that for a few reps, even a few sets. And then from there, we can say, okay, now that you have a good understanding of what we're doing, let's add a little bit more intensity. That is the exact same approach we're taking with nasal breathing. We're starting with something that's really, really low intensity, very doable for most athletes, and that's just going for a PBO walk, 30 to 45 minutes at a really, really chill pace, nasal breathing. And if you're going to implement this into your training week, I would say do this once, maybe twice a week. For me, even though I do a lot of nasal breathing with conditioning on the fan bike and while I'm rolling hard at jujitsu, I still do PBO walks at least once a week, if not, 3 to 4 times a week. It gets so crazy hot out here in Sacramento. Sometimes I know, like, okay, if I go for my PBO walk now, where I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk after lunch, or like in the middle of the workday, I know that I'm going to get so sweaty that when I come back, I'm just going to have to take a shower again. So in the summer times, I try to do them in the morning or on the weekends when I have a little bit more time to get sweaty and take like 6 showers a day or something like that. So that's level 1 on how you can improve your ability to nasal breathe. Level 2 would be, well, we're going to just increase the intensity a little bit, but nothing too crazy. And that's going to be doing your zone 2 cardio while focusing on nasal breathing in and out of your nose. Zone 2 cardio has gotten really, really popular over the last several years on different podcasts and things, and it's been around forever. And what's great about Zone 2 cardio is that it's really going to help build out that aerobic base of your conditioning. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can quantify zone 2 cardio. Some people say, like, yeah, you're going to go for a run at a conversational pace. You should be able to maintain a conversation and not be out of breath while you're running. Some people will wear heart rate monitors where you're tracking, your heart rate at about 85% of your maximum heart rate and sustaining that for 20 to 45 minutes or so. I think what's cool is that you can do zone 2 cardio in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to only be running, and it doesn't only have to be on the treadmill or on an exercise bike or something like that. When it comes to zone 2 cardio, this is something that I learned from Merrick Health, is that the physiological definition of zone 2 cardio is the highest level of output you can produce while keeping below the lactate threshold of 2 millimolars per liter. And unless you're willing to check your lactate in the middle of training, which can be kind of a pain in the butt, um, that is kind of the goal that we're looking for. And it's, if you don't have a way to check that in the middle of your workout, you can kind of ballpark it a little bit by aiming at about 85% of your maximum heart rate sustained for about 20 to 45 minutes, or you can try to maintain a conversational pace while you're going for a run or while you're doing some rowing on the Concept 2 or the fan bike, whatever the case may be. And by conversational pace, it should be, you shouldn't be able to host a podcast like I'm doing right now, but it should be a little difficult to maintain a conversation. If it's impossible to maintain a conversation, you're probably not in zone 2 anymore. You're probably going a little too hard. And if you're trying to nasal breathe in and out of your nose while you're doing zone 2, it's actually a great measure and indicator of zone 2 conditioning, because if you're able to maintain nasal breathing for 20 to 45 minutes and it's difficult but still doable, that's a sign that you're probably pretty close within that zone 2 cardio range. If you go out for a run and you're going to run for a half hour, and the first 20 minutes you're nasal breathing, but then the last 10 minutes you're breathing in through your nose and out your mouth, you're probably running a little too hard and are beyond the range of zone 2. If you are exhaling really, really hard and inhaling really, really hard, you're definitely way out of zone 2. So, step one in developing and improving your ability to nasal breathe would be those PBO walks where you're just walking for 30 to 45 minutes, 1 to 2 times per week, nasal breathing the entire time. Level 2 would be introducing your zone 2 cardio and doing it while nasal breathing. You can do this again 1 to 2 times per week for 20 to 45-minute bouts. You can pick any piece of conditioning equipment you want, or you can go for a run, fan bike, rower, skier, dragging a sled, going on runs, whatever you want to do, really. And you're just going to focus on nasal breathing the entire time. Now, the third level, which I think is really fun, and there's so many different benefits of doing this, is introducing breath holds to improve your CO2 tolerance. And this is awesome. I do these breath holds all the time. And because by doing a series of breath holds, you can improve your body's ability to better handle those higher concentrations of CO2. And what's also cool about some of these breath hold exercises is that you get a little bit of a post activation potentiation effect, basically meaning that you do one thing and that's going to help you be better prepared to do something else, or it's going to stimulate some different processes in your body so that way you can have a little bit more output towards something else. So an easy example of post-activation potentiation is, say you have two kettlebells, they are completely identical. One of them weighs 200 pounds, one of them weighs 50 pounds. You pick up the 200-pound kettlebell and you're like, damn, this is really heavy. And then you go to the 50-pound kettlebell, your body's amped up and ready to pick up something heavy. You rip the kettlebell off the ground and you almost fall over because you're producing so much extra force because you were stimulated by the 200-pound kettlebell. So then when you go and pick up the 50-pound kettlebell, it feels crazy, crazy, crazy light, and you're able to put a little bit more output into picking up that kettlebell. Doing breath holds works very similarly, where not only is it going to, over time, as you continue to do them week after week, not only is it going to improve your CO2 tolerance, but you also get a little bit of that post-activation potentiation effect where you are going to see a little bit of an increase in your VO2 max for about 45, 60 minutes. I think in the Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen, which is where I originally heard about this, I think he might have even said you could see some acute improvements in VO2 max up to 90 minutes after doing the breath holds, which I'll have to revisit that. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. But if you're doing a 60-minute to 90-minute jiu-jitsu class and you do some breath holds right before, you're going to have a little bit better conditioning going into that training session. Now, some examples of a breath hold workout that you can do. This is something that I picked up from Patrick McEwen. I originally heard of this from my guy, Phil DeRue. Phil DeRue was the first guy to put me on game to Patrick McEwen. Was also learning some breath hold stuff from Mark Bell, which was really cool. But this is something that Phil DeRue put me on to, and then this is now something that I use for myself before every grappling training session, and it's also something that I have all my competitors do in their warm-up on the day of competition. And the breath hold workout is this. You're going to do 2 sets of 5 reps. 1 rep is going to be a regular inhale and a regular exhale. And then you're going to hold that exhale until you start to feel the slight urge to breathe, or you feel the first kind of spasm of your diaphragm. You're not going for a maximum breath hold. If you are going for a maximum breath hold, you're doing this workout wrong. We don't want to hold our breath so long to where we go for an inhale and go and have to take a giant breath in. If you're taking giant breaths in, you're not doing the workout correctly. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just not matching the intent of this workout. So 2 sets, 5 reps, normal breath in, normal breath out, resting about, say, 3 to 5 minutes between sets. If you're doing this for the first time, so you've gone through level 1, where for 3 to 4 weeks you're doing your PBO walks 1 to 2 times a week, then you move up to doing zone 2 with your nasal breathing, say 1 to 2 times a week, 20 to 45 minutes, run that for about 4 weeks. Then you start transitioning into working in some breath holds. If you're doing breath holds for the very first time, do them seated first. I don't want anybody listening to this podcast and like, oh, I'm going to do it standing and then start passing out. And that'd be bad. So do it seated first. Then after about a week or 2, as you get used to the feeling of how to do it, then you can start doing it standing and trying to count steps for every rep. So I have athletes do this pretty much before every grappling training session as part of their warm-up, and then we also do it before they go compete in competition. So 2 sets, 5 reps, normal breath in, normal breath out. If it's your first time doing this, do it seated. If once you get more familiar with it, you can take your normal breath in, normal breath out, and then start counting your paces just to see and keep track of how you're improving from week to week with this workout. And you can do this workout pretty much every day. Like, you can do it before every jiu-jitsu session. You can do it every morning, first thing after you are doing your normal morning routine. You drink your coffee and you're about to go to the gym, but before you get in the car, you're like, all right, I'm going to do my breath hold workout. Or maybe you drive to the gym and then do your breath holds there. Do not do these, and I just need to give this warning out there, do not do these in the car. Do not do these in the pool. You do not want to have a shallow water blackout. You do not want to get lightheaded and pass out while you're driving. Unfortunately, I've heard stories of people doing this and really putting themselves in bad situations where they get lightheaded and they pass out in the presence of water or in the car, and that is just a bad idea. So do it at the gym, do it at home, somewhere safe. Just keep that in mind. Just need to throw that out there. So that is step 1 to improving your conditioning, getting control over your breath, being able to control your breathing in and out of your nose. That's not to say that there is never a time to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and that doesn't mean that there's never a time to breathe in and out of your mouth. But you want to make nasal breathing your default form of breathing, whether you're just hanging out, relaxing, whether you're at work, whether you're rolling at jiu-jitsu. When you're lifting in the gym, it's a little bit different because if you're doing a 1 rep max deadlift, you are going to exhale out through your mouth a little bit at the top of that deadlift or at the top of the squat. That's totally fine. But once you're done with your lifting set, get back to nasal breathing. So I did this today, actually. I did some max effort Zercher squats. I did some walking dumbbell lunges and stuff. And when I did the Zercher squats, I stood up and went kind of had like a hard exhale at the top of each rep. But then once the set was done, I closed my mouth, get back to nasal breathing, try to bring my heart rate back down, try to bring my respiratory rate back down, and be chilling so that way I can move into the next set feeling good. So once you get your breathing on point, now it's time to start building out your aerobic base. I've talked about this concept before on how a pyramid is only as tall as the width of its base. This is something that Louis Simmons talked about all the time. But if we think of your athleticism, or even if we just think of your conditioning, not even talking about strength, explosive power, or anything like that, if we're just talking about conditioning, the peak of conditioning that you can achieve is really going to be built and dependent on the base of aerobic conditioning that you have. So build out that aerobic base, and then start to increase the peak of the conditioning output that you can have. And when it comes to building your aerobic conditioning, not only is it going to be the foundation for your higher intensity forms of physical activity and the foundation for higher intensity, shorter duration forms of conditioning, but it's also going to be a huge driver of recovery. This is something that I also wish I didn't make the mistake on early enough when I was doing when I was wrestling. I made so many dumb mistakes in training when I was wrestling that I look back and I was like, man, I was a freaking idiot. But when you know better, you do better, right? One thing that I was doing a lot in wrestling was I did run quite a bit, um, but I wasn't building my aerobic base wasn't a huge emphasis. I was doing a ton of CrossFit work, so it was very glycolytic. It was very very high intensity, short duration workouts, stuff like that, and my conditioning did get pretty good, but I think a weakness that I had back then was that my aerobic base wasn't built out to what it could have been. And if I built out my aerobic base a little bit more, I believe that would have helped me have better recovery between all the time that I was going to the gym, all the time that I was on the mat wrestling, all the tournaments and stuff that I was going to. I really feel like that would have helped me a lot. So, building your aerobic base of conditioning is not just important for your performance, but in the gym and on the mat, but it's also going to be very important for your recovery. Now, there's a couple different things that you can do when it comes to building out your aerobic base or your oxidative conditioning. There's a couple training options or a couple training methods that I'm a big fan of. The first one, I've originally picked this up from Joel Jamieson. Joel Jamieson is an OG in the strength and conditioning game when it comes to combat sport strength and conditioning. He has this great book called Ultimate MMA Conditioning. He was Mighty Mouse's strength and conditioning coach for a long period of time. Mighty Mouse, one of the greatest combat sports athletes to ever walk the face of the earth. And one of the methods that he uses to improve oxidative conditioning and build out that aerobic base is something called cardiac output training. Now, this is very similar to zone 2, and if you just looked at a cardiac output training workout, you might say like, oh, this just looks like zone 2 cardio. And what Joel Jamieson talks about is cardiac output training is about 30 to 60 minutes at a sustained effort at a fairly low intensity, but it's done with the goal of building out the left ventricle of your heart. And if you're able to increase the size and strength of that left ventricle, you're able to pump more blood with every beat, be more efficient in how you're circulating blood, which means you're going to be more efficient in how you're circulating oxygen to the different tissues of your body. And he uses cardiac output training to really develop that. The goal is to do something for 30 to 60 minutes that's sustained throughout. So that could be running, biking, rowing, using the ski erg, using the fan bike. You can probably even drag a light sled, go for a ruck, or have like a heavy backpack on, stuff like that. That is going to be part of your cardiac output training, 30 to 60 minutes. When I program this for athletes that I'm working with, we usually do this only once a week. Um, we, if they have a very, very big conditioning deficit where their conditioning is really, really bad, we may use cardiac output training / zone 2 cardio up to 2 times a week. But for the most part, just start them out with once a week, and then if we really need to, we can up it to twice a week. And that is going to cover kind of that zone 2 style cardio. Now, the next form of conditioning that you could do to improve your oxidative energy system or your aerobic base is another thing that I picked up from Joel Jamieson, and that is high intensity continuous training. So this is when you use a strength exercise. This could be step ups, walking lunges, dragging a heavy sled, using an exercise bike at max resistance, and you're going to do it slowly and continuously for 10 to 20 minutes. And it's great for increasing your local muscular endurance. It burns like crazy, and it's actually pretty damn difficult. But it's going to help you get a lot of great local muscular endurance while still kind of staying within that aerobic range without having a huge spike and systemic fatigue. So within the Strength Matrix training app, one of my favorite training programs is called Foundations. And in the Foundations training program, in phase one, the base builder phase, we do a ton of high intensity continuous training. And we do it by either doing 10 to 15 minutes of walking lunges at the end of every workout, or 10 to 15 minutes of some heavy ass sled drags at the end of every workout. And this has been huge. So I first heard about high intensity continuous training from Joel Jameson in his book, but when I read it, I realized, like, wait a minute, I've been doing this already for quite a while. I've been doing this for like 3 or 4 years now, because when I first got into bodybuilding, I was following a lot of Corey Gregory's workouts. And when I was prepping for my bodybuilding show, the cardio that I didn't do, I wasn't running, I wasn't on the stair stepper for 45 minutes. I did a ton of walking lunges, like 10 to 15 minutes of walking lunges, 5, 6 days a week. And what's awesome about that is those walking lunges, I was using it as my main form of cardio. Plus, it also built up crazy strength in my lower body, my hips, my knees, my low back just felt fantastic. It was also doubling as a great form of conditioning to build my aerobic base, where I was still in that aerobic range, but I wasn't doing like a 60-minute run or anything like that. I was also building up a ton of local muscular endurance, which really helped once I started doing jujitsu, which was only like a couple months after I did that bodybuilding show. And I was able to do that without creating a huge spike in systemic fatigue. So, those are two of the best ways you can build your aerobic base, and it's kind of continuous. You can go out and do a 30 to 60 minute run or a 30 to 60 minute rowing session or fan bike session. If you don't have that much time, that's okay. You can do high intensity continuous training where it's 10 to 20 minutes, continuous step ups, walking lunges, dragging a heavy sled, whatever the case may be. I use both of those with a lot of athletes that I work with. And then there's one third and final form of building out your aerobic base that I'm a big fan of. And I also use this with a lot of athletes, and that is GPP giant sets. I've been doing these for probably like 5 or 6 years now, and they've been very beneficial and not only improving my aerobic base and the aerobic base of the athletes that I work with, but they're also great for just building up different weak points. So if someone has weak shoulders or a weak upper back or weak hamstrings, we could work on conditioning, and we can also work on bringing up those weak points through GPP giant sets, or general physical preparedness giant sets. And this is how I structure GPP giant sets. Usually we do 4 exercises for the upper body, 4 exercises for the lower body. These exercises are supposed to have a very low stimulus to fatigue ratio, meaning like something that's not going to beat you up too much. You wouldn't want to mix like overhead squats or snatches as part of a GPP giant set. I'm talking stuff like sled drags, banded face pulls, banded curls, uh, battle rope, sled rows, sled tricep extensions, all that stuff. You're going to pick 4 exercises for the upper body, and you're going to do each set for about 60 to 90 seconds. Sometimes I prescribe reps to them if I know how long that number of reps is going to take. It's like, hey, you got to do, sets of 25 on all of these things. I mean, sometimes I don't even care about the reps. I just say, like, look, you're just going to go for 60 seconds on each of these exercises. And you run it like a circuit, so it takes about 4 minutes or so. So 60 seconds on the forward sled drag, 60 seconds on the backward sled drag, 60 seconds going to the left, 60 seconds dragging the sled to the right. After that, you rest for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then you hit it again. The goal is to not treat this like a CrossFit workout where you're going guns blazing, going hard in the paint as hard as you can on all those exercises. That's not the goal. The goal is just to maintain a consistent output for each of those exercises, back to back to back. Once you've done one set of all those 4 exercises, you rest for a little bit and then you hit it again. And while we're doing this, we're really focusing on nasal breathing the entire time. And I forgot to mention that for cardiac output training and high intensity continuous training, we're also really trying to focus on nasal breathing as much as possible during those things. For the GPP giant sets, we really only do that once a week. And when we do those on a day where we're doing a GPP giant set of 4 exercises for the upper body and a GPP giant set of exercises for the lower body. So that is building out your aerobic base for jiu-jitsu, and some of the best forms of doing that I've found that have worked great for myself and all the athletes that I coach. But I hear you, dog. You're probably wondering, like, hey, Coach Jay, when are we actually going to do the higher intensity stuff? So let's talk about it. There are 4 types of higher intensity workouts that I tend to prescribe for athletes and that you can start using in your own training. Remember, we want to build out that big base of aerobic conditioning. That is really important. But a mistake that I see a lot of grapplers make is that is all they do. They just build out the base. They don't stack anything on top of it. They don't do any high intensity conditioning, and they don't do anything to improve their repeat sprint ability, and it shows in competition. I've seen a lot of matches where guys will talk about, like, man, like, my conditioning is great. I feel good. I went to open mat. I did 10 6-minute rounds straight. I'm feeling awesome. And then they do one match in competition and then they gas out. And that's because they're not used to hitting those higher forms or those higher intensity forms of conditioning and working on their repeat sprint ability. So when we talk about these types of workouts, we're going to talk about the alactic energy system, or ATP PC. We're also going to talk about the lactic energy system, or the fast glycolysis focused energy system. And there are 2 types of workouts that we can do for either one of those energy systems: workouts to focus on power and workouts to focus on capacity. When we're focusing on power, we're focusing on the maximum amount of output that we can have for that particular energy system, or for the emphasis of that particular energy system. When we're working on capacity, we are working on the amount of output, but we're also working on how well we can recover from that output and then hit it again. Recover from that high level of output and then hit it again. So the first workout is going to be alactic power. These types of workouts focus a lot more on proving the maximum output that you can have, really focusing on that anaerobic alactic or ATP PC focused energy system. So a classic workout that I'll use for athletes in this would be 6 rounds of 6 to 10 seconds of work with 2 to 3 minutes of complete rest. And one of my favorite ways to do this is either with sled sprints, hill sprints, or on the fan bike. You just rip it as hard as you can for about 6 seconds, and then you have a complete rest of about 2 to 3 minutes. And I do mean a complete rest. I don't mean like biking slowly or running really, really fast and then running slow. I mean like stop, have a complete rest, get back to nasal breathing as much as you can, try to get control of your breath and your heart rate, and then get ready for the next set. That would be an alactic power workout. Now, an alactic capacity workout is very similar, where we're going to do 6 rounds of 10 seconds on, but only 50 seconds of rest. What we're doing is we are pushing the bounds of how long you can sustain that maximum level of output. So instead of only doing a 6-second sprint, you have to do a 10-second sprint. And then instead of getting, 2 to 3 minutes of rest to like really feel like you're recovered between sets, you only got 50 seconds. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to maintain that high level of output, but that's the kind of training stimulus that we want. We want to challenge that so that way your body can make adaptations to be better at that in the future. So alactic power, 6 rounds, 6 to 10 seconds of work, 2 to 3 minutes of rest. Alactic capacity, 6 rounds, 10 seconds on, 50 seconds off. Now, when we talk about anaerobic lactic, or the fast glycolysis energy system, we can work the same thing. Work for power, we can work for capacity. An anaerobic lactic power, or fast glycolysis power workout would be 6 rounds of 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. I actually just finished a phase of training where I did this for about 6 weeks, and it was really, really tough. And it's one of my favorite workouts to do. I mean, I absolutely hate doing it, and I try to find excuses to not do it all the time, but I still do my best to get it done anyway because it's so potent, and it's just awesome for improving the output that you can have in that short 30-second window. Sorry, I misspoke. Anaerobic lactic power is 6 rounds of 30 seconds on, 3 minutes off. My apologies. Let me correct that. Power, we want to make sure that we're having a really, really high output, but we have plenty of rest to recover from that. So anaerobic lactic power, 6 rounds, 30 seconds on, 3 minutes off. Now, if we wanted to work on capacity, we would do the workout that I just mentioned. So, anaerobic lactic capacity is going to be 6 rounds of 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. So, 90 seconds, it's a decent amount of rest, but it's not the most ideal amount of rest that we're going to have. And so when we do 6 rounds of 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off, we're focusing on improving our capacity to be able to have a really high output for those 30 seconds, quickly recover, and then hit it again. Have a high output for 30 seconds, quickly recover, and then hit it again. So those 4 types of workouts are different things that you could use to work on your higher intensity forms of conditioning. And you can mix these workouts into your training program however you want. It just really depends on your overall training goals and the training adaptations that you're working towards. Now, you might be wondering, like, hey, can I do this on the same days that I lift? Yes, these types of workouts, focusing on anaerobic alactic, focusing on anaerobic lactic, those types of conditioning workouts are going to be great on the same days that you lift, mainly because when you're lifting, you're using a lot of the lactic and alactic types of energy systems, the ATP, PC, and fast glycolysis energy systems. When it comes to pairing the right workout at the end of a strength workout, one thing I like to think of is time domains. Just really trying to make sure, like, hey, are we working within a similar time domain on our conditioning as we did with our strength work? So say you did, like this morning, I did Zercher box squats working up to a 3 rep max. My top set probably took 20 seconds or so. Like from the time I unracked the bar, hit my 3 reps, and then racked the bar again, it was about 20 seconds in length. All right, cool. So that's a good sign that if I do conditioning at the end of this strength workout, my work intervals should be about 20 seconds in length. That's not to say that if you go lift and then you go run for 60 minutes afterwards, that is like the end of the world. It's not, but in my opinion, I have found that we get better results when we try to keep the training stimulus focused on similar things at a time. We don't, you guys have probably heard this phrase before, you can't ride 2 horses with one ass. So on one day, we're focusing on the shorter duration, higher intensity forms of conditioning, which also coincide with the energy systems that are used for that type of conditioning and the typical strength work that we do. Then on another day, we might focus a little bit more on the oxidative or aerobic energy systems that are more aligned with lower intensity, longer duration. As you get closer to competition and you have all these different types of workouts that you can do, it's important that you start to focus your conditioning more on the specific type of conditioning that's going to be needed for competition. We want to train with specificity towards the competition that we're working towards. So like I said, I got 2 guys right now that are training for Masters Worlds. Masters Worlds is a really interesting tournament because regardless of what belt you are, regardless of what age group you are, you have a 5-minute match, which means that you don't have as much time to work for as an upper belt as you normally would at like regular worlds or regular pans. So if we only got 5 minutes, those matches are going to be really, really short and really, really intense, which means that we need to make sure that our alactic conditioning is on point, that ATP PC energy system is on point. So that way, if you need to blast through on a double leg, if you need to blast through on a knee cut, you have the energy to do it. We also need to make sure that their fast glycolysis conditioning is on point, where if they get into a scramble, they can hit that scramble well and not feel completely spent afterwards. On the other end, we also need to make sure that their aerobic conditioning is on point, because if you're going to be doing 3, 4, maybe 5 matches at Masters Worlds, you need to have a decent amount of aerobic conditioning to sustain your body and to sustain that physical output across the entire day, to be able to quickly recover between matches, to be able to, have better ability to replenish those energy stores as you're recovering between matches. So when we're out of training camp, so we're like more than 12 weeks out from training camp, we'll focus a lot more on the aerobic base side of conditioning, or more of those oxidative forms of conditioning. As we get closer to competition, we start to emphasize a lot more on the ATP PC types of conditioning as well as the fast glycolysis types of conditioning. And that brings us to the next part about conditioning that's important to mention, and that's going to be supplements. Supplements do have a pretty significant impact on your conditioning. If you're new to the podcast, I just did a giant breakdown of all the supplements I take, 26 different compounds and supplements that I take to help improve my performance both in the gym, on the mat, and help me recover faster from all the training that I'm doing when I'm lifting heavy and rolling hard. So if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely cue that up next. If you have listened to that episode, some of these compounds and supplements that I list are going to sound very familiar. So let's run through them very quickly. So the first supplement that I'm a big fan of that can help with conditioning is creatine monohydrate. It's going to help provide your body with more creatine, so that way you could use it, especially when you're using that ATP PC or that ATP phosphocreatine energy system. It can be great for brain health. It can be great for helping you build more muscle. It can be great for helping you eke out a couple more reps at the end of a really hard set. It can also be great for if you're doing a lot of sprints and say like the maximum amount of output that you can sustain on the fan bike is 7 seconds. Over time, supplementing with creatine monohydrate may help you be able to have about a 8-second or maybe a 9-second output on that. Now 2 seconds, that doesn't sound like much, but over time that does add up. The next supplement that I'm a big fan of when it comes to conditioning is L-carnitine. L-carnitine is fantastic because it really helps with fat oxidation, and there's a lot of other hormonal benefits that come from L-carnitine, which I do talk about in the supplement episode that came out probably a month ago. But when it comes to conditioning, L-carnitine is great for improving mitochondrial function and fat oxidation, which also has a glycogen sparing effect. So what this means is your body has different forms of getting energy. You can either break down glycogen or you can break down fat. Usually when you're doing fast glycolysis forms of conditioning, you're breaking down glycogen for sure. Now, when you're doing more oxidative stuff, you can go through glucose oxidation, which is using glucose to break those molecules down to provide your body with energy for some of that oxidative and aerobic work. However, you can also break down fat. And so if you have L-carnitine, that's going to emphasize and help shift things a little bit more towards fat oxidation. So you're able to use a little bit more fat from within your body and save some of that glycogen, which can be great for conditioning. I take creatine every single day, about 10 grams, just mix it in my intra-workout shake. I take about 300 milligrams of L-carnitine before every jiu-jitsu session, and this is intramuscular L-carnitine. In the other episode, I talk a lot about why I don't take it orally and all that stuff. Now, you can also take intramuscular phosphocreatine, which is like the fastest way to help replenish those creatine stores within your muscles, so that way you can quickly regenerate and replenish ATP and use that as a good energy source when you're doing things like your ATP PC forms of conditioning. You're running through someone on a blast double, you're doing some max effort squats or some max effort presses. Some intramuscular phosphocreatine can be a great benefit for that. Now, the other supplement that is probably the best supplement that I've ever found for conditioning is going to be diisopropylamine dichloroacetate, aka DATA. What DATA really does is it helps shift your body to focus more on glucose oxidation as opposed to glycolysis. Now, when your body focuses on glucose oxidation, it's using oxygen a little bit more to break down glucose more efficiently and cleanly, which means that you're going to have a little bit greater sustainable energy with less overall metabolic waste. So I have found the combination of L-carnitine and DATA to be absolutely fantastic for jiu-jitsu. And the main reason being is because on the L-carnitine side, we're really focusing on fat oxidation. We're sparing some of that glycogen. On the DATA side, when we do need to use glycogen, we're shifting a little bit more towards glucose oxidation, so that way we're able to use oxygen to break down glycogen a little bit more efficiently, have less overall metabolic waste, and more sustained energy. So those things are absolutely fantastic for jiu-jitsu, mainly because it's a mixed energy domain sport. So you are going to use fat as a fuel source. You are going to use glucose or glycogen as a fuel source. And if you're able to take some things that can help your body be more efficient in that energy production process and a mixed energy domain sport, that's going to help you have more conditioning while you're rolling hard in those sparring rounds. And it's also going to help you recover a little bit faster in between those sparring rounds. At least those are the biggest benefits that I've seen. I feel like when I take those two together before I lift, I don't necessarily feel like a buzz or like I had a bunch of caffeine or anything like that. I just noticed that I can scramble for a little bit longer before I get tired, and between rounds, I recover a lot faster. And if those are the only two benefits that these things are giving, that is good enough for me, even though they do give a lot more benefits. Now, the other thing that you could use that can help with your overall conditioning is going to be bicarbonate. I take an intramuscular or injectable form of bicarbonate. And what this does is it helps buffer some of the lactic acid, or helps buffer lactate within the muscles. So if you think about, like, if you did a really, really hard set of 20 reps on curls, your biceps are going to be burning. The bicarbonate is going to come in and kind of help buffer some of that burning sensation, so that way you don't feel that as much. It can help kind of prolong the point at which you experience a lot of fatigue from that. Now, the reason why I take intramuscular bicarbonate is because, and I told the story on the supplement podcast, is that you could use baking soda, like mix it in water. However, it can cause some digestional distress, which means you do run the risk of having disaster pants, and you don't want to have disaster pants at jiu-jitsu. That would be really bad. So don't do that. Next supplement on the list is dimethylglycine. This is going to help boost oxygen utilization and delays fatigue by enhancing your aerobic metabolism. So when we talk about the oxidative energy system, where you're creating energy with the help of oxygen, DMG or dimethylglycine is just going to help improve and make that process more efficient, which if you can do that, it's going to help provide more oxygen to your muscles, it's going to help you have a little bit more energy, help delay some of that fatigue. Now, the other supplement that I want to talk about was ITPP. This is going to improve oxygen deliverability from hemoglobin. It acts as an allosteric effector of hemoglobin, which means that it's going to reduce its oxygen binding affinity. And so this shift helps increase oxygen release from red blood cells. So that way they can be delivered to the tissues, and it can help improve your overall endurance. ITPP is pretty dope. I don't use it for every single training session, but just by improving the oxygen deliverability of your body, that's going to help with your overall conditioning, and in some ways it can also help improve your overall recovery as well. I do need to make the note that ITPP is banned by WADA, so if you compete in the IBJJF, ITPP is probably not for you, but thankfully, all other jiu-jitsu competitions let you take whatever you want. So, if you don't compete in the IBJJF, ITPP is could be helpful for you. A lot of acronyms going on today. All right, and then the last supplement that can help with your conditioning, and this is the one I have the least experience with when it comes to specifically using it for conditioning, is going to be methylene blue. Methylene blue is going to be a huge support to your mitochondria, just improving mitochondria output and health. And if you're able to improve the health and function of your mitochondria, that by extension can help improve your conditioning. And I have heard of some people using methylene blue on their conditioning days, more of their oxidative or aerobic focused conditioning sessions, to help with that process. I personally haven't used it, and I almost didn't even put it on the list, but I've heard enough people talk about it, just taking methylene blue before they go out for their zone 2 cardio, or before they do, like I've heard of a lot of bodybuilders actually using it before they do their cardio, 45 minutes on the treadmill or on the stair stepper. I've heard enough people talk about it that I figured it'd be worth mentioning in here, that it can have some positive effects on your conditioning, but I will say that I don't have any personal experience using methylene blue for conditioning. I mainly use methylene blue for the cognitive benefits and the recovery benefits. So, like, I took methylene blue before I podcasted today, and I take methylene blue when, my wife and I are going out paddleboarding and just hanging out in the sun, relaxing. I'll take methylene blue on those days as well, but figured it'd be good and important to mention it here. Hey, real quick, I wanted to pause the podcast and tell you about the Strength Matrix training app and our free training program called Grappler Accelerator. This is a complete training program that covers all of your needs to help you get started on becoming the best grappling athlete that you can be. Everything from a full strength and conditioning training program, a simple and clean diet guide, recovery protocols, a super sleep toolkit, and a bunch of other dope stuff to help you lift heavy and roll hard. There's already over 1,000 grapplers that have downloaded this training program and gotten started on enhancing their grappling athleticism, and you can be the next. To download this training program today, just go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler or click the link in the description below. Now, back to the podcast. So we've talked about everything that you can do when it comes to fixing your breathing to help with your conditioning. We've talked about how you can build out your aerobic base. We've also talked about how you can improve your ATP PC conditioning and your fast glycolysis conditioning. We've talked about everything you can do off the mat to improve your conditioning, but there's one thing that you can do on the mat that's also going to help improve your conditioning, and that's just going to be to get better at jiu-jitsu. I know this sounds super obvious and you're probably thinking like, that makes so much sense, Coach Jay. Thanks for wasting our time with this hour-long podcast just to tell us to get better at jiu-jitsu. But I will say that I felt like I had the biggest growth or saw a pretty significant improvement in my conditioning when I went from year 2 at purple belt to years 3 and 4 at purple belt. I was a purple belt for 4 years. In the first half of purple belt, my conditioning was good, but there was something that happened where I saw a huge jump in my conditioning around year 3 and especially in year 4 at purple belt. And the biggest difference was that I just got really, really good and a lot better at jiu-jitsu. I'm not saying like I got really good in the sense that I'm like the best in the world, because Lord knows I get cooked by anyone that's actually really good. But at least in my own experience, I felt like my conditioning was a lot better due to my improvement in the skills of jiu-jitsu. And really that comes from just being more efficient with all of your movements on the mat, and also having a much better understanding of what to do. I know that sounds like kind of obvious, like, oh yeah, if you know what to do, you're gonna save, you're gonna save some energy. But I found that especially when I was a white belt and a blue belt, when I would get caught in these positions where I didn't know what to do, I'd wasted a lot of energy just trying to do the one thing I thought would work, and kind of just like constantly hitting my head against a wall to try to make it work. So if I had a really hard time passing someone's guard with a knee cut and the knee cut wasn't working, I was thinking like, well, I don't know any other options from here, so I'm just going to try to knee cut a little bit harder. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to hold as tight as I can and then try to knee cut a little bit harder. And even though I was doing all my conditioning work off the mat and I wouldn't necessarily gas out a whole lot at jiu-jitsu, I found that as my skills improved, especially with guard passing or guard retention, so did my conditioning, or at least my ability to not fatigue so quickly, where found like I felt much better at like, hey, I know how to position myself so I can slow these people down, so that way I don't have to chase them as much. If I'm on bottom, I know where to position my knee shield, where to position my frame, so that way I don't burn myself out trying to hold their weight so much. And so if you're doing all the right stuff off the mat, that is going to help improve your conditioning on the mat. But at the same time, get better at jiu-jitsu. Find ways to be a better grappler. Even though this podcast is going really deep into all the details of how conditioning works for grapplers, the 3 like simplest things I could suggest for anybody that struggles with conditioning is fix your breathing, work on your repeat sprint ability, or those higher forms of or higher intensity forms of conditioning, and then just get better as a grappler. You do those 3 things, I guarantee you're going to see massive improvements in your conditioning on the mat. And with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the questions that were submitted by the Lift Heavy Roll Hard Grappling Club. What's absolutely crazy is I have never gotten this many questions for a podcast before. I think there's like 20 questions that we got to get through, which is nuts. And these are good questions too. So if you guys are listening to Lift Heavy Roll Hard, a grappling club, thank you so much for submitting these questions. That is like one of the best ways you can support the podcast, is because that helps me better understand what you guys want to learn about, what you guys need help with, so that way I can do my part in helping be your guide to you developing elite grappling athleticism so you can feel and perform your best. So without further ado, let's run through these questions. We got a question from Juan. His question is, how many times per week should I work on my conditioning? Can I combine aerobic and anaerobic training on the same day? So when it comes to how many times per week you should be working on your conditioning, it depends on how bad your conditioning is. It's kind of like, hey coach, how often do I need to lift for jiu-jitsu? So, well, like how much time do you got? And how weak are you? How much stronger do you have to get? So conditioning is very similar, where I think that because jujitsu is very conditioning heavy in and of itself, like training the sport of jujitsu has a lot of conditioning stimulus in it. You don't have to do as much conditioning off the mat if you're training pretty hard on the mat. I would say for most grapplers that I work with, I have them do at least one conditioning session per week, and on average, maybe like 50% of the time we'd increase it to 2 conditioning sessions per week. I will say this though, if you're doing a lot of training on the mat, you need a lot less conditioning off the mat. If you're only going to jiu-jitsu once or twice a week, you could probably do some conditioning 2, maybe even 3 times a week. If you're going to 6 jiu-jitsu classes every single week or even more, probably don't even need to do that much conditioning off the mat. Now the next question, can I combine aerobic and anaerobic training on the same day? You can, but you would want to separate those things by at least 4 to 6 hours, so that way you're able to get a really good strong training stimulus in one of those types of conditioning, rest, recover, and then get another really strong stimulus in the other type of conditioning. And an easy way to do that is to lift heavy and roll hard on the same day. When you are lifting heavy, you're focusing a lot on that anaerobic energy system, and you could mix in some specific anaerobic conditioning at the end of that strength workout. If you do that before work, then you have a full work day, then you go to jiu-jitsu at night. When you go to jiu-jitsu, you're going to be emphasizing a lot more of those aerobic energy systems. Now, what I think you might be asking is like, hey, can I do sprints and then can I go do zone 2 cardio right after? Or can I go do zone 2 cardio and then can I go do sprints afterwards? And I would say you can, but you're not going to get the best results in my opinion. I know there's some people that say like, oh, the interference effect isn't really that big of a deal. And the way I look at it is, hey, whatever we're training, we want to get the greatest training stimulus we can, so that way we can, in response, have our body create the greatest adaptation. So if we want to get really, really good at high intensity conditioning, where we're able to put in a ton of output for 10 seconds, you do that training session, then you go home, rest, recover. If you do that those high intensity 10-second sprints, and then you go run at a lower intensity for 45 minutes afterwards, that's great. Both of those things can be beneficial, but you're not going to get as much out of that high intensity stimulus, and you're not going to get as much out of that low intensity stimulus. In my opinion, it's better to have those separated on different days, so that way you can get the most out of each. Next question from Nathan. Will heart rate training, zone 2 to zone 5, be beneficial for rolling at jiu-jitsu? Yes. So heart rate training and the different heart rate zones can be very beneficial because it's kind of like working off of percentages for your barbell lifts. You could just load up weight on the bar and not even see what the weight is and just see like, hey, I unracked the bar. This feels kind of heavy. Cool. Probably going to get stronger. But if you're able to be a little bit more specific with like, hey, I'm within like 90 to 92% of my all-time best right here. So I know what kind of benefit this is going to give me in helping me get better at stimulating my absolute strength. Or I'm lifting 30% of my 1 rep max, but I'm lifting really fast and explosive. So this is going to help improve my ability to be explosive, to be powerful. So having those heart rate zones can be a good gauge of knowing like, hey, in zone 2, these are the type of benefits that we tend to see by doing zone 2 cardio. When we go to zone 5, these are the kind of benefits that we tend to see when working in zone 5. So having a little bit more specificity with how you're training your conditioning can be very beneficial for your jiu-jitsu and for your grappling gas tank. Next question from Sumi Sumro. If we can only do one type of conditioning exercise, should we do anaerobic or aerobic conditioning for jiu-jitsu? And it really depends on what your biggest weakness is. If your biggest weakness is repeat sprint ability, where you feel like you can go to open mat, you can roll for 60 minutes straight and like not be completely, wiped after that 60-minute training session and feel pretty good, but then you go to competition and you have one hard match with a wrestler that you get one good takedown and one good scramble and then you're completely gassed out. Well, if that's the case, you probably need to work on your repeat sprint ability. And that one conditioning session per week that you have available to you should be focused on repeat sprint ability. If you're someone that's already super explosive, you're already ridiculously strong, but you can only roll for 6 minutes and then you completely gas out, well, that's a sign that you should probably work that one conditioning session and focus that one conditioning session more on the oxidative or aerobic side of things. So, to answer your question, if you can only do one type of conditioning exercise, it really is dependent on what your weaknesses are, and it should be focused on building up those weaknesses. Next question from Azim Sheik. We got the Sheik in the house, everybody. How can I better balance conditioning work off the mat to be time efficient with my lifting? So, when it comes to blending your strength work and your conditioning work, I really like to focus on trying to match the time domains. So, if I'm doing a strength workout, say I'm doing Zercher squats, working up to a 3-rep max, and that top set of 3, takes 20 seconds from the time I unrack the bar to hitting my 3 reps and then racking the bar. I rack it, takes about 20 seconds. That's a gauge for me to know, okay, if I want to keep my strength and conditioning work kind of working a lot of the same energy systems or emphasizing a lot of the same energy systems, my conditioning intervals should also be about 20 seconds in length. And that's a way that you can be efficient with mixing strength work and conditioning work in the same training session as long as those time domains are very similar. I would not suggest like lifting really, really heavy and then going for a 45-minute run. You're better off with separating those into 2 separate training sessions. That way you can you can squeeze the most out of that one lifting session with a little bit of higher intensity conditioning. And then when you do some lower intensity, longer duration conditioning, you can squeeze the most out of that training session. Next question from Rua Coach. What is the best cardio that transfers to Jiu-Jitsu wars? Rolling hard. That's the way it goes, man. Yeah, the number one thing that you can do to improve your jiu-jitsu conditioning is to roll hard. However, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that you should do. I think sometimes people think that just because rolling hard at jiu-jitsu is the best thing that you can do for your conditioning, they sometimes take that as that's the only thing that you should do for your conditioning, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's important to roll hard. If you're only doing flow rolls, if you're only doing passive drills, your conditioning for jiu-jitsu is going to suck. But if you're rolling hard, that's awesome. You got the number one thing, the S tier activity that you could do for improving your grappling gas tank, you got that on lock. Then to supplement that, you can add 1 to 2 conditioning sessions per week to help with your conditioning on the mat and just base those extra sessions or extra workouts based on whatever your weaknesses are. So if you roll hard on the mat and you find that you really struggle with being explosive for multiple bouts, well, off the mat, that'd be a good sign that you need to work on your repeat sprint ability. If you feel like you're really explosive for one round and you do like one 6-minute sparring round and you feel okay, you do a second 6-minute sparring round and then you're completely gassed out and you're wiped for the rest of class, that's a sign that you probably need to work on your overall aerobic conditioning or oxidative conditioning, and that can be something that you work on off the mat. Next question from Gusio Combat Performance. How do you plan conditioning for guys during comp prep and before competition prep? So it really depends on the type of competition that they're going to be doing and how far out an athlete is from competition. If an athlete is out of training camp, so they're 12 weeks or more away from training camp, we tend to focus a little bit more on some of those lower intensity forms of conditioning to help build some of that aerobic or oxidative base of conditioning. As the competition gets closer and closer, we start to emphasize a little bit more repeat sprint ability alactic capacity, alactic power, all that stuff. The types of conditioning that are a little bit focused more on higher intensity, and we're really focusing a lot on increasing the maximum amount of output that they can have in a very short window of time, being able to recover well and then hit it again. Recover well and hit it again. So outside of training camp, we might do, zone 2 cardio once a week. We might do some GPP giant sets once a week. As we shift into training camp, we're going to do workouts like 6 rounds of 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off. Doing different types of sprints with the sled, doing different types of sets where we're really explosive with the med ball for 10 seconds, resting for 50 seconds, then hitting it again. Next question is, what is the most important energy system for BJJ compared to MMA? So jiu-jitsu is interesting because there's all these different types of rule sets. So even within jiu-jitsu, it's hard to say like, oh, this is the number one energy system that's most important for jiu-jitsu. If you're competing at CJI, where you have three 5-minute rounds with a 1-minute break, that's going to look a little bit different as opposed to if you did a no time limit match. So when we look at the nature of MMA and the nature of jiu-jitsu, MMA is very, very, very explosive. It's way more explosive than jiu-jitsu. So you do need to have a very high level of anaerobic alactic conditioning and anaerobic lactic conditioning, working on things like your ATP PC energy system, working on things like your fast glycolysis energy system. However, a 15-minute fight or a 25-minute fight is a long time, and you got to make sure that your body's efficient at recovering between those explosive bouts and between those explosive efforts. So you do also have to have a very high level of aerobic conditioning. So it's hard to say that one of those 3 primary energy systems is most important for MMA and that the others aren't important. They are all important. And depending on who you're fighting, depending on what your skills and your strengths are as a fighter, that may emphasize even a little bit more which energy systems you need to bring up or which energy systems you need to emphasize a little bit more in training camp. When it comes to jiu-jitsu in nature is a lot less explosive, but it still can be explosive. So you do want to work on your ATP PC conditioning. You do want to work on your fast glycolysis conditioning, and you do want to work on your oxidative conditioning. However, the type of competition that you're going to do is also going to influence what would be most important for you. So if you're competing in a no time limit match, yeah, you got to make sure that your oxidative conditioning is on point. If you're competing in a 5-minute Masters Worlds tournament, your higher intensity forms of conditioning you really need to be on point because you don't have as much time to get the same amount of work done. So I can't really say that one is most important compared to the other. They're all important, but what determines what you should emphasize in working on in training camp is going to come down to the type of competition that you're doing, your skills and strengths as an athlete, and your weaknesses as an athlete. Next question from Ruben. If I roll 4 to 5 times a week, with some days having double sessions, how much conditioning should I do off the mat? Ruben, you're training a lot, so you probably don't need that much. It really just depends on what your weaknesses are. So if your weaknesses are that you lack repeat sprint ability, you probably only have room to hit 1 conditioning session per week where you could work on repeat sprint ability. If you're doing that much rolling per week, I don't think that you would have a big aerobic weakness, but in the event that you do, then yeah, that 1 conditioning session per week should be focused on improving your aerobic capacity or your oxidative energy system capacity. Now, next question from Chris. How to do conditioning without adding mass to my quads? That's a good question, man. My legs have gotten so big over the last few years from doing like all those walking lunges and dragging a sled and squatting and stuff to where it's almost impossible to find pants that fit. And I think in 2023, I decided like, you know what, I'm really going to try to not make my legs grow anymore. Like I'm going to try to make them smaller. And it was honestly kind of like a wasted effort. It didn't last very long. So all that being said, unfortunately, Chris, if you're really concerned about adding mass to your quads because your quads get blown up pretty good, just do upper body stuff. But at the same time, if you only do upper body stuff, you do start to lose some of that local muscular endurance capacity for your lower body. And it's just part of the game of being jacked. If you have body fat to lose, that can also help as well. I know for me, like when I go through a big bulk, I do if I do gain body fat, it definitely goes more to my lower body. So if pants aren't fitting or if I'm like busting the seams on my jeans and I'm in the middle of a bulk, that's a sign that's like, hey, I can either spend more money and get bigger pants or I can end this bulk and try to slim down a little bit. So hope that helps. Question from J.Nito1502. Is it better to do the fan bike for longer or for a lot of shorter rounds? And bro, it really just depends on what your training goals are. You can use the fan bike to develop your aerobic base or your oxidative capacity where you're doing 30 to 45 minutes at a really chill pace, focusing on nasal breathing the entire time. You can also use the fan bike to work on higher intensity forms of conditioning. Workouts where you do like 6 rounds of 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off, and stuff like that. One is not better than the other. It's about finding what is most appropriate for your training goals and your training needs. Next question from Chris. When taking rest periods, is it better to sit or walk? It just depends on what your training goals are. So there are definitely workouts where it is better to rest. There are workouts where, or I should not say better, there are definitely workouts where it's more appropriate to rest and have it be a complete rest. And there are other workouts where it's more appropriate to have an active rest. In all of the workouts that we mentioned in this podcast episode, the goal is to, when I say rest, like actually rest, like full rest. There are other forms of conditioning where there's this guy, something Fartlick, and he came up with this method called Fartlick training. Definitely change the name on that. But it's basically where you go really, really hard for a short period of time, and then you kind of keep it pretty chill for a little bit longer period of time. So that might be 1 minute really hard on a run, 4 minutes of an easy run. 1 minute hard, 4 minutes easy. And you're not stopping, it's continuous all the way through, but you have moments in that workout where the intensity is really high and then intensity drops a little bit. Question from Musta MSS. How to bounce back into shape in the fastest way possible. I got the solution for you, bro. I created a training program just for you. The 30-day Grappler Accelerator training program really was designed for this problem. Like if you feel like you're out of shape or you're coming off of an injury or you're coming off of a break from jiu-jitsu, you step on the mats and you realize like, geez, like I got to build up my conditioning, my strength that doesn't feel it's where it should be. I want to try to at least get a little bit more jacked. The Grappler Accelerator training program was built for this in mind. So I'd strongly suggest going to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler and checking that out. You can download it completely for free. It's a free training course, has your workout program, simple and clean diet guide, super sleep toolkit, recovery protocols, daily mobility routine, basically everything that you would need to get started on kickstarting your grappling athleticism. So Musta MSS, definitely check that out, my man. Next question from Ricardo Tubbs. What is the optimal training based on the type of competition? Example, super fight versus a tournament. So that's a great question. So when you're prepping for a super fight, obviously the time domain of the super fight has a big effect. If you're doing a 10-minute super fight, that's going to be different than if you're doing a 30-minute super fight or a no time limit super fight. So the shorter super fights are really going to be emphasizing a lot of those higher intensity forms of conditioning, your ATP PC energy system, your fast glycolysis energy system. You also want to have somewhat of a built out aerobic base because you want to your aerobic conditioning and your oxidative conditioning is going to help be running in the background to replenish those higher intensity energy systems like ATP, PC, and fast glycolysis. So you want to make sure that you don't just only go hard in the paint on sprints and not have any aerobic base built out. You definitely want to work on all of those. But if it's a super fight where you just have one match and it's a shorter duration match, you're going to emphasize a little bit more the higher intensity forms of conditioning. If you have a tournament, you have multiple matches, and even within the tournament is going to change how you develop your conditioning. If you're, competing at Masters Worlds where the matches are only 5 minutes, you do need to have a really robust, high intensity gas tank to hit, to have your repeat sprint ability developed, so that way you can hit the match hard in 5 minutes. If you need to scramble past someone's guard, if you need to scramble to the back to get the finish, you want to have the conditioning to be able to do that. But if you're going to have multiple matches, you also want to make sure you have a built out aerobic base that's going to help you recover between all of those matches. I think a lot of times when athletes go into competition, they will do a lot of high intensity conditioning sometimes, or high intensity like Shark Tank rounds and stuff like that, which is great. That's awesome. We definitely want to have our higher intensity conditioning built out. But then they don't work on their aerobic base in their off season. So then they show up to the tournament and they feel really good in match one, feel okay in match two, and then they crash and burn in match three. So just keep all that in mind. It's important, like I said, that you want to develop all three of these things. And as you get closer to competition, you may start to emphasize one energy system over the other, but that doesn't mean that you just drop the training of the other energy systems. So, hope that is helpful. If you have follow up questions on like a specific tournament or a specific match that you're prepping for, drop them in the comments below and I'd be happy to help you out. Next question from Jose. Is it better to do long duration cardio or HIIT training? One is not better than the other. It's just a matter of which is more appropriate for your training goals. HIIT training can be awesome when it is done correctly. I think a lot of times people screw up high intensity interval training, and it gets kind of caught in this like dysfunctional middle ground where you're not getting the most amount of benefit you could be getting out of it, but you do get really tired and exhausted, so you do kind of feel like you did something. And that is not necessarily better or worse than doing lower intensity, longer duration conditioning. It's just different. So take a look at what your training goals are, take a look at what your individual weaknesses are, and try to find the conditioning that matches best with making those improvements towards your goals and building up those weaknesses. Question from Autodidact Athlete. Any substitute for air bike sprints? I don't have one. It depends on what you have access to. So what I love about the fan bike is that it's cyclical, that you can just start spinning that thing and there's nothing that is going to stop your momentum. It's not like a rower or a skier where you're basically doing a lot of reps where you pull the handles of the rower, you feed it back in, and then you got to pull on it again. I love cyclical or pieces of equipment that are cyclical for conditioning. If you don't have a fan bike, some other cyclical things you could use would be pushing a sled, dragging a sled, hill sprints. You can even just do regular sprints if your lower body and hips and all that are built to sprint and handle sprinting. If you don't have that, well, you could just use a skier. You could just use a Concept 2 rowing machine or an exercise bike. Those things work as well. Next question from African Brat _OG. Should you do conditioning after your strength work or do it in a separate training session when focusing on martial arts? That's a great question. It really just depends on what kind of conditioning that you're doing. The higher intensity forms of conditioning pair a lot better, or it's maybe not better, but it's more seamless to pair those higher intensity forms of conditioning with your strength work as opposed to those lower intensity, longer duration forms of conditioning. So if you're going to pair conditioning with your strength work, say you're doing like a dynamic effort workout where you're doing, broad jumps, you're doing speed squats, you're throwing medicine balls and all that stuff, that'd be a great day to put some of your sprint conditioning on there because it's high intensity, short duration. It's very similar to what you're doing in the gym. It would not be a good idea to do your dynamic effort work and then follow that up with a 45-minute run. It'd be better to get the most out of that dynamic effort workout, squeeze as much as you can out of that training stimulus, and then on a separate day, focus on your lower intensity, longer duration conditioning where you can squeeze the most out of that training stimulus. This is a question from DiMarzio102. Why is rolling hard and not enough to build your conditioning? The main reason being is because even though rolling hard is the number one thing you can do to improve your grappling cardio, doesn't cover all your bases. You're still going to have weaknesses as an athlete that may need to be worked on outside the mat. It's kind of like people who say, "Oh, I don't need to lift weights. I could just do jiu-jitsu." It's like, well, you can. You are going to get stronger if you are grappling and pushing and pulling against live bodies. But you know what would be even better and more specific to your individual weaknesses? If you go to the gym and have a training program that you can follow, so that way it's very specific in how you're adapting, so that way you can take those adaptations and apply them on the mat. The other thing too is that as you get better at jiu-jitsu, your conditioning improves, not necessarily from improving your actual gas tank, but just by being more efficient. And I see a lot of upper belts mask their poor conditioning with better and better tactics and technique or better grappling skills. And it's unfortunate that there may be, I've coached some grapplers that were upper belts, they're brown and black belts, where they're some of the better guys in the room, and they're like, man, my conditioning is awesome, or I thought my conditioning was awesome. I could roll with all the students in an hour, tap all of them 2 or 3 times, and just like smoke everybody. But then they go into a competition and they wonder why their conditioning failed. It's because their conditioning isn't getting tested. Their conditioning isn't being pushed and challenged on the mat because they're so technically proficient. They're so skillful. It's not putting a challenge to their conditioning. So what they would need to do is take their conditioning off the mat to challenge that. And there's a lot of different factors that go into that. But I do believe that the number one way to improve your conditioning on the mat is to roll hard. That is the number one thing you can do. However, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that you should do. So just keep that in mind. This is from Angry Balance. Does constant training in high heart rate zones damage the heart? If you don't recover well and your nutrition is poor and you are doing a lot of other stuff like you're smoking, you're drinking alcohol excessively and all that stuff, yeah, you're probably going to have some heart issues, but I highly doubt that any of that would be due to hard conditioning training, mainly due to the other stuff. What's great is that high intensity conditioning where you're getting your heart rate up really, really high. If you structure it well, just like a strength workout, it's going to be good for you. It's going to be great at strengthening your heart and improving your work capacity for your heart, improving the health of your cardiovascular system. It's kind of like, is lifting weights bad for my muscles because I feel sore afterwards on some days? It's like, well, I mean, if you are always sore and you never recover, yeah, that's probably a bad thing. But if you just recover afterwards and make sure your diet is squared away, it's good for your muscles. Your muscles are going to get stronger. Your muscles are going to get bigger, which is what we want. So, works the same way with conditioning. Question from Koi Sims Emi or Koi Sims Zemi: does lifting also count as a form of conditioning? In my opinion, no. Just because there are some studies that show that lifting weights has some, not impressive, but some cardiovascular benefits, that does not mean that is a good enough form of conditioning. Just because you get your heart rate up when you watch a scary movie doesn't mean that watching scary movies is a suitable form of conditioning as a grappler. As a grappling athlete, you need to roll hard. As a grappling athlete, if you have conditioning weaknesses, they need to be addressed off the mat with specific conditioning training. Just because lifting has been shown to improve your cardiovascular health, that doesn't mean it's conditioning. It's lifting. It's designed to help you get stronger, more explosive, more powerful. That being said, don't make that excuse of, oh, I'm just going to lift and my cardio is going to be great. Like, it doesn't work that way. My heart rate goes through the roof when I watch movies like Uncut Gems or Heat. That doesn't mean that I should do 3 rounds of watching Heat to work on my conditioning. That'd be weird. I would watch Heat 3 times in a row, but it's not going to help my conditioning. All right, a couple final questions here from Stan the Viking. How would you use the fan bike for a beginner? That's a great question. When it comes to a beginner in jiu-jitsu that's wanting to work on their conditioning, a couple things that I have them do is just try to work on improving their work capacity. And I think that the fan bike has been one of the best tools that I've found to help grapplers do that. And so what we'll do is we'll do a workout where we do 6 rounds of 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off. We keep the conditioning pretty low. we keep the intensity pretty low, and we're focusing on nasal breathing the entire time during both the on intervals and the off intervals. And what we want to do is we want to gradually build up their capacity to increase the output that they can have for those 60 seconds, successfully recover, and then match that output on the next round, and then be able to maintain that over the course of 6 intervals. What this does is it helps beginners improve in building their overall work capacity and their ability to nasal breathe in and out of their nose while they're doing physical activity. All of those things are going to help contribute to improving their conditioning and gas tank on the mat. Next question from in Lester underscore Titan Performance. How do you progress work to rest ratios? That's a great question. So with the different energy systems, you're going to have different work to rest ratios. Typically for the ATP PC energy system, you're using like a 1 to 15 or a 1 to 20 work to rest ratio. When you're focusing a little bit more on fast glycolysis, your work to rest ratios are typically going to be around a 1 to 3 to 1 to 5 work to rest ratios. And then when you're doing oxidative conditioning, that's going to be a little bit more even with a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. I'm just pulling those off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've looked at the National Strength and Conditioning Association's work to rest ratios chart, but I'm pretty sure those are still what they are. An easy way to think of it is like, hey, the more intense you're doing something, the more rest you're going to need. And if you are sprinting really, really, really hard, you're going to need a lot of rest. If you are just doing a really chill jog for, 60 seconds, like the workout I was just telling Stan the Viking, you probably only need about 60 seconds of rest because the output wasn't that high, the intensity wasn't that high. Next question from Zion's Osman. How many times a week is a cardio session necessary? Zion, it really just depends on what your conditioning weaknesses are and what your training goals are. If your conditioning is really, really poor, you could benefit from doing conditioning about 2 days a week. If your conditioning is pretty solid, maybe you just need one conditioning session per week to maintain. It's also going to be dependent on how much jujitsu you're doing. If you're doing jujitsu 6 days a week, like you really only have about one session per week that you have room for conditioning. If you only go to jiu-jitsu twice a week, you have a lot more room to do conditioning. So it's just going to be dependent on your training schedule and dependent on what your training goals are. Last question from my dog, Dave. What's going on, Dave? Good to hear from you, bro. Should you do hard conditioning on the same day you do hard rolls? Not to belabor the point, but it depends on what your training goals are, depends on what kind of conditioning you're doing, and it depends on your overall training schedule. So when I'm working with an athlete, I like to stack their highest stimulus training sessions in the same training day. Main reason being is because if we stack those on the same day, we can follow it up with a lower stimulus or a recovery day, so that way they're better prepared for the third day. So for example, on Monday, that for most of my athletes, that's a lift heavy, roll hard day. And when we lift heavy on Monday, we might do some conditioning. We might lift heavy, do the max effort squats, do some accessory work, and then finish it off with some sprint intervals on the fan bike. It's a lift heavy session with some conditioning kind of tacked on there at the end. And then we're still going to roll hard that day. The next day, Tuesday, is going to be real low training stimulus or even just a complete rest day. That way they feel fired up and recovered and ready to go on Wednesday. If I had them do a hard lift on Monday, hard jiu-jitsu on Tuesday, and then hard lift again on Wednesday, they don't have as much time to get good enough recovery, and by Wednesday they're going to accumulate some fatigue. If they keep that going, by Friday they're going to be completely cooked. So I do like to stack the highest stimulus training sessions in the same day. However, there may be times where I specifically want them to go into a grappling training session feeling really, really good. Like this would be a comp simulation day where it's the day where their hardest sparring partners are there, the toughest guys in the room are all showing up. If that's on those training days, I usually don't put conditioning there because they wouldn't go for a 60-minute run before their first match of a tournament. So I wouldn't want to do that on their competition simulation day. So again, it depends on how you're organizing your training week, depends on what your conditioning weaknesses are and where it would be best to plug those in. If you're in your off season, that's the point of the year. Like if you're not really competing at all, that's the time to like really lean into your athletic adaptations where it's like, hey, I'm still going to go to jiu-jitsu 3 days a week, but I don't really care if I show up to a jiu-jitsu class feeling really sore or just really fatigued from the long run that I did, because my focus right now is building up my athletic capacity and maintaining just my grappling schedule. If you're prepping for a jiu-jitsu competition, that's obviously going to be a little bit different, where you'd want to be a little bit better prepared and a little bit more fresh going into those grappling sessions compared to just some of the conditioning workouts. So Dave, I hope that answers your question. If any of you listening to this podcast have questions or comments or just want to say what's up, please drop them in the comments below. I try to respond to everyone's comment as best I can. You guys are the absolute best. I love hanging out with you guys. The Lift Heavy Roll Grappling Club is growing strong. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast episode. If you need help in building your conditioning as well as getting brutally strong and packing on slabs of muscle, check out the Strength Matrix training app. We got a free training course in there called the Grappler Accelerator. In 30 days, it's going to teach you everything you need to know about kickstarting your grappling athleticism. Lift heavy, roll hard, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.